Welcome back. This time I would like to talk a little bit more about immigration. Until recently, the only issue on which Trump remained net positive was this issue, immigration. And this after the 4 years of cruelty and children in cages that characterized his first administration just 4 years ago. So something big has to happen for people, even though the immigration was not determinant of their vote, even for those for whom Trump's cruelty toward immigrants was not determinant of their vote, is very heavy that just 4 years later, many, especially among Hispanics, many end up supporting Trump's immigration policy, especially when it promises to not to be more reasonable, but even more cruel, more harsh. If you pay attention to other countries that have gone through far-right governments, especially those who never came back to democracy like Russia and Hungary, you will see that the demonization of immigrants played a significant role in their narratives. Like in the case of the AFD in Germany, we are talking about nationalist narratives that exclude the foreigner, where there is no room for a melting pot. And even though the AFD doesn't have the power, of course, that Putin has in Russia or Orban in Hungary, they still, like the UKIP in England, has the has will be able to push the immigration narrative not to more rational levels, because more rational levels could be demanded, especially in the case of integration of respect for the not just the laws but also the norms of the host country. And though it is true that the AFD in Germany doesn't have the levels of power that Putin has in Russia or Orban in Hungary, they have been able to tilt the public opinion like they use you keep tilted it on this issue in the United Kingdom. And so I expect more restrictive immigration policies in Germany, but it's also true that in the name of multiculturalism, some groups have kidnapped this issue, like here in the United States, and take it to delirious levels where immigrants are not supposed to respect the laws and norms of their host country. So, and unfortunately, the Abolish ICE movement that kidnapped this issue and is still holding it hostage will have a very damaging effect on this issue unless the Democratic Party, realizing that by reframing this issue, they will push the streams to the fringes, both abolish ICE and MAGA. Unless this happens, I am not optimistic. I have talked in the past extensively about the important role immigration plays for American citizens, as if properly addressed, and I support a JFK narrative. As you know, it demotivates the far right and exposes the triviality of the identitarian far left. I have also proposed a strategy to make that possible, so I'm not going to repeat all the details here. But yes, it's possible to make improvements, and you will see that if you watch that video. which of course dismiss all the nonsense you may have heard before about immigration reform. You just have to click the links in the upper right corner and you will see an alternative to the cruelty of the far right and the childishness of the far left. So yet it is possible. There is no, and it's complicated, yes, but it's not as complicated as the issue has been portrayed. Of course, it is close to impossible if you try to find a middle point between MAGA and woke, but it's not impossible if you try to find a middle point between a rational right like Cato and a rational left like which would be an FDR left, which I as unfortunately I don't see it in the works. Um, Unfortunately, I cannot say that even Bernie is reviving that FDR spirit, as you cannot marry the New Deal with woke, and that's something Bernie still has not decided. It's an issue he and AOC have been avoiding. I have also already talked about how, as in Hungary, the abuse against immigrants may be a prelude to the abuse against citizens, as this abuse is initially justified by the so conceived diminished status of immigrants. So it's okay to do that to them because they are just immigrants, but then it is rationalized as a normalization of the abuse itself, regardless to on whom it is applied, and then it's when it's applied to citizens. We have seen the rationalization of arbitrariness starting in the application of the Alien Enemies Act to immigrants, just because in the delirious far right narrative they call them invaders, and then the little disguised attempts at submitting academia, media, the judiciary, and even the military. If we consider Hexet's, Pete Hexet's purge of generals and admirals that is currently in process, and the latter is affecting citizens, not immigrants. So we start with immigrants, but we end up, as in the case of Hungary and other countries that champion the xenophobic flag, we ended up applying them to citizens. This, not to mention the mutilation of institutions like the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the attacks on the independence of the Federal Reserve, which affect both citizens and immigrants. But once the dissenting voices have been purged, will find little or no opposition. Then we see Dutch redefining government on a 19th century model under the excuse of cutting fraud and waste, without the Democrats countering that narrative with one of their own, either FDR's or Clinton's, which is very telling about the silence, the ridiculous strategy of playing dead that is also extended to immigration, but which is also a consequence of their silence on immigration. As let's remember, the core MAGA base main motivation is immigration. And yet, we have seen so, and precisely because this perceived weakness, we have seen the reluctance of the working class to repent of their vote, just 2% of Trump voters would vote differently if the elections took place today. We can see this especially among Latinos, among whom, even after the levels of income uncertainty that alienated them from Biden, though in the case of Biden it was more inflation uncertainty, have grown to even higher levels. We can see this especially among Latinos to the point that they are starting to disapprove of Trump. However, as mentioned before, only 2% repent their vote, and among those same Latinos who now believe Trump has gone too far on immigration, just about 40% believe that Democrats have the right priorities. While the disapproval of Trump is encouraging, the reluctance to give Democrats a chance is understandable. It's true that Democrats, when they are out of power, cry that they are powerless. And when they are in power, that they cry that they can keep their promises because they have to meet their Republican friends in the middle of the road, what they understand as bipartisanship. And yet, this is not the worst. No one would dispute the fact that Trump lies more, and yet they see something even worse in Democrats: weakness. And Schumer's strong letter is the best example of that. Latinos have learned that Schumer bangs his chest like a fierce gorilla when he gives speeches, but then keeps to Trump when he has to vote. And when they see no reaction from the party as a whole, they have to conclude that that is the tone approved by the party, and on that they are not wrong. Let me be clear on this. It's true that the party cannot adopt one line and only one line, but they could sponsor a range of lines. They could embrace an FDR narrative and a Clinton narrative, and also whatever falls in between. What they cannot do is stay silent, because then that's an invitation to for Republicans, in this case Trump Republicans, not only to define the issues but also to define the parameters of the debate. The problem is that Democrats keep playing dead, betting it all on the scenario that voters disappointed with Trump will come back to them, and that is not necessarily true. Even if that 2% grows in the future, that's not necessarily true. Apathy may lead to low turnout, low enough to give MAGA the upper hand. Uh, and remember that motivation at the right is higher than the motivation at the left. Partisan loyalty is much bigger among Republicans than among Democrats. Or worse, you may end up with a third party that searches to capitalize on the rage and disappointment that Democrats are taking for granted and spoil the 2028 elections, maybe even the 2026 midterms, as Democrats are seen as detached or weak. Another problem is the fear the Democratic leadership feels of the woke left, which has resulted in the counterproductive way immigration has been framed. On that, the working class and Hispanics are not wrong either in their disapproval of the Democratic Party, since it was Biden who led these abolish ICE activists dictate policy at the border, and destroy a 2.5 decades of positive trend on attitudes towards immigration. Even if this offends the woke left and Biden's feelings, a new immigration narrative must be created, one based on the values expressed by JFK in a nation of immigrants, and it won't come from the Democratic Party because before defying the identitarian left, instead of defying the woke left, they have preferred throwing immigrants under the bus, as the votes of Gallego and Fetterman show. So it must come from the civil society, a civil society that realizes that even if they don't like immigrants, they like their democracy, and to deprive the far right of its motivation, a fair immigration reform must be achieved, one that honors JFK and Alexander Hamilton, our most important immigrant. Yet, am I optimistic? Unfortunately, I am not. Neither the media nor academia are helping this civil society connect the dots. So they realize how important immigration is as an issue if they want to push MAGA back to the fringe. And that's why I am not optimistic. I expect even much less from activists who, in the first place, because of cowardice or because of mediocrity, they embrace the abolish ICE cool activists that have led to this disaster. Because Trump, if somebody helped Trump to rationalize his cruelty, 4 years ago, it has been the disaster, especially border states have witnessed at the border. Having said that, let me leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of this hour. Among other news,
New 266 executive decisions were released in the Oval Office during the weekend. Among them, 1. State Secretary Lil Marco will be appointed National Security Advisor in place of Michael Waltz. Secretary Lil Marco will perform the duties associated with both positions simultaneously. 2. State Secretary Lil Marco will also be appointed the new EPA Administrator in place of Lee Zeldin. Secretary Lil Marco will perform the duties associated with the three positions simultaneously. Visibly emotional, Secretary Rubio thanked President Trump for the appointments. Likewise, he declared that he was flattered to be taken into consideration to also replace current Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and that he still has not received permission to return from the Maldives. 3. State Secretary Lil Marco's mission in the Maldives extended until 2026. 4. From now on, President's Day will be moved to June 14, the day of his birthday, and renamed as America's Day. B. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick engaged in a feisty dispute about who was Trump's best adulator as they were leaving the Oval Office after a to-be UK trade deal was announced. Arguing about who had said the best dithyramb, Prime Minister Starmer declared that 1. President Trump was his hero and Winston Churchill was a lightweight by comparison. That both Churchill's and Roosevelt's roles in World War II were definitely overrated. 2. That he had an ode he had written himself, where he declares his secret wish of one day being considered worthy of Trump's love, and then proceeded to read it for the press. 3. He was willing to surrender Zelensky, MERS, and even his own wife and mother to the Kremlin if President Trump demanded from him such proof of love. On the other hand, Secretary Lutnick declared that 1. Trump was the best president of the United States, of the world, and of the universe. Take that, George Washington. 2. That he had a tattoo portraying Trump as Rambo on his right buttock and pulled down his pants to prove it. 3. A secret letter where he expresses his wish to become the president's slave, preferably a sex slave, the day Trump decided so. C. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi denounced British Prime Minister Starmer and Commerce Secretary Lutnick for machismo and misogyny after the aforementioned excluded her from the dispute about who was President Trump's best adulator. Demanding a chance to show that only she could demean herself, she declared that 1. President Trump had saved 250 million lives in the United States, but over 9 billion people worldwide in over 200 countries. 2. Trump University, which she decided not to prosecute after receiving a $25,000 campaign donation, should take over Harvard as homage to President Trump's genius. 3. The Supreme Court should apologize to President Trump for not approving of his disregard for court decisions and the rule of law. Who do they believe they are to judge him? She wondered rhetorically. 4. She and her husband have a large poster of President Trump in their bedroom, precisely over their headboard, which her husband, with special devotion, uses for inspiration. 5. Secretary Lutnick stole her line about Trump being the best president of the United States, of the world, and of the whole universe. D. After the Washington Post disputed some of Navarro and Lutnick's assertions, the tariffs czar and the commerce secretary decided to respond. In their own words, 1. The Washington Post maliciously declares that the jobs of the future, which will come back to America thanks to President Trump's tariffs, will most probably be made by robots, not workers. This reveals profound ignorance as, in alternative facts, both can be true. 2. When Donald Trump said we've got $5 trillion of factories coming to America in 4 years, what he actually meant was $5 trillion per year. But that will always be tetradimensional chess for the likes of the Washington Post because they forget that when you use alternative facts, you have to suspend reality, like in the movies. 3. We have a $1.2 trillion trade deficit. If we cut that 25%, that's 1% of GDP growth in America. $300 billion grows America 1% for the rest of our lives. But because stopping imports would crash our economy, President Biden will get those bad countries to send us their staff for free. That way, they won't have to pay tariffs. 4. The $5 trillion tax cut championed by the president will benefit mostly the working class because as soon as the top 1% receives it, they will have to redistribute it to the working class. That way, we save on distribution costs, and with that, we can eliminate the fiscal deficit. What part of that Mr. Kessler and Mr. Lynch can't understand? 5. Mr. Kessler and Mr. Lynch mocked our statement that the Lutnick-Navarro would bring God's kingdom to earth, and even somebody called me Secretary Lunatic, but that's because they don't believe. Let's see how good their sense of humor is when we send them to Soco in El Salvador to join Paul Krugman. New scandal in Argentina shakes President Milei's presidency. A new scandal, which has even devolved into fistfights in the Argentinian Congress, is hurting President Milei as he tries to show enough stability to convince the IMF to sign a new extended credit facility. Name the IMF uses for loans destined to cover long-term balance of payment needs. The 23rd in the case of Argentina. And though the session was supposed to deal with the crypto scandal that involved Milei weeks ago, it was later revealed that just a few congressmen from La Libertad Avanza, the president's party, had learned of the agenda and instead believed that a new talk show was scouting for guests for upcoming episodes. The IMF expressed its concern about the incident, and that if the Casa Rosada couldn't give satisfaction to President Modi for India's grievances regarding the Argentinian YouTuber Terminester, the signing of the long-term loan might be at risk, which would force Milei to a drastic devaluation of the peso. Just hours after the IMF expressed concern about the session of the Argentinian Congress that was going to debate the crypto scandal affecting President Milei, more damaging news was revealed by the newspaper Clarín. The new scandal involved a company dedicated to tourism packages in Gaza and Sudan that had obtained the president's endorsement at a private event for the tiny amount of $500. The same amount President Milei received for each of his 2 tweets endorsing the $Libra meme coin. Currently, the Peronists are investigating other possible scandals. 1. Milei appearing in infomercials endorsing products in exchange for free samples. 2. Milei demanding that visitors to Casa Rosada buy lottery tickets sponsored by his party, La Libertad Avanza. 3. Milei supplying scalpers with tickets to Lali Esposito's concerts during the night and selling dollars during the day. 4. Milei charging $50 to Argentinian media and $150 to international media for interviews and photographs taken with him. An IMF representative declared that the tiny amount charged for the $Libra tweets showed that President Milei didn't know how to steal, especially in crypto, where other presidents have at least charged $2 million per tweet, and that if these instances of President Milei selling himself for coins were confirmed, the 23rd IMF loan was out of the question. It's heartbreaking that Argentinian kids will be shunned by Papa Noel this Christmas, but if these accusations against President Milei prosper, we'll have no other choice, added the IMF functionary. President Trump convokes Secretary Rubio to the White House to appoint him interim defense secretary. Secretary Rubio returned briefly from the Maldives to receive a new token of appreciation from President Trump, who appointed him interim defense secretary, just in case the current secretary is forced to resign. Also, in recognition of his loyalty, he was awarded 3 more medals. This makes a total of 12 medals Marco Rubio has been granted by the president. Rubio will perform his duties as State Department Secretary, National Security Advisor, EPA Administrator, and Interim Defense Secretary from the Maldives, and it will be his duty to intervene decisively via secure lines whenever the president allows him to make decisions on matters related to those departments. One day, I will be able to return to the United States in my beloved state of Florida, and I will have more time to express my gratitude to President Trump, who, due to his multiple occupations, has not been able to dedicate me more than 5 minutes in the appointment ceremony. And my medals, I always press them to my chest as I revive that high honor before going to the American consulate in the Maldives to start my workday. The United Conference of Catholic Bishops, with a long conservative tradition, decided to celebrate the election of an American pope, Pope Leo XIV, with an invitation to the brethren to return to the Church with a campaign named Time to Return to God. The core of the campaign is to adapt the teachings of Leo XIV to the faith of real Americans. Thus, when the new pope says that you should love the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow, what he really means is that you must send them to Socorro in El Salvador. And when he speaks about Jesus's love for the poor, what he really means is that the rich need another tax cut. Besides, the conference ratified previous teachings of the Church that declare that Christianity is not about the Good Samaritan parable, but about celebrating Christmas with gifts before tariffs make them prohibitively expensive, calling Muslims towelheads, deriding gays, celebrating Uncle Bibi's colorful attacks on Gaza, and cutting SNAP and Medicaid. Senate Minority Leader Schumer presented his new plan, playing dead to win, which will replace his confusion strategy. Considered by DNC Chair Ken Martin as too aggressive, the confusion strategy led to Schumer's vote in Congress for the continuing resolution that gave him polemic powers over Congress's appropriations, and to the strong letter he sent to President Trump. All these extreme measures had become a distraction to our mission of taking Rachel Zegler's Snow White to the first spot on Disney+. How is the Harris-Biden ticket going to face the voters in 2028 if we can't get at least that? Asked Chair Martin rhetorically. Ken is right, declared Senator Schumer. When voters at last understand that Trump is not cool, they will come back to us and demand that we ask their pronouns. J. The U.S. Army is planning a parade for Trump's birthday and, incidentally, for its own anniversary. President Trump will be celebrating his 79th birthday while the Army will celebrate 250 years since its creation. Since this is the first event of its type on American soil, and following the advice of Russian President Vladimir Putin, President Trump's personal friend, the parade will count with Russian weapons and the participation of Russian soldiers and officers who will come to train their American counterparts in the details of an event of such magnitude. The training involves the presence of the Russian army in American bases and the Pentagon for an indefinite period, before and after the parade, to make sure the event meets President Trump's expectations. Asked by American media about the costs, President Trump declared that he had already decided cuts to Social Security and Medicare to make sure the parade costs would not affect the deficit. Justin McCall, 28, from Florida, accidentally shot himself in the leg while he tried to steal a vehicle using a gun. The accidental discharge forced McCall to plead to his victim for help to take him to the nearest hospital, where he was arrested and taken to Okaloosa County's sheriff's office. Because of his large criminal record, his recidivism in car robbery, and the use of a gun and intimidation, McCall faced a condemn of at least 20 years according to Florida law. Yet, McCall decided to join the National Rifle Association, which advocated for the inmate, assigned him a lawyer, and got his sentence reduced to 6 months of community service. Besides, as the reason alleged by the defense was that Florida had not protected McCall's Second Amendment for not providing him with safe use of guns training, the defendant will have to prove that he has satisfactorily completed such training. Moreover, just as in other cases since January 6, the defendant joined the Republican Party and declared himself a patriot. I am doing that as an insurance policy. If I am caught in my next job, I will always be able to allege that, like the patriots of January 6, I was motivated by my deeply held religious beliefs. Those NRA lawyers are real good, man, added McCall after his release.
This has been the news of this hour. Sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This is the right church for you. If so, Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven for only a donation of $50 a month. You will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them, and for $100, Heaven Premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed, if you're not satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover.